Before we begin, the Gamers Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, AM Komnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
Here's the thing about Wyll. Wyll in early access is not the Wyll that you know. Different voice actor, different personality. Me and Banana have talked independently. If Wyll and Karlach's roles were switched, I would find them make more sense. No, we haven't gotten to Karlach yet, so that's not fair. But Wyll is the kind of the guy who has issues, but that arc is so obvious. It's so much of the trope that unfortunately he becomes a plain Jane vanilla and a group of characters that are not plain Jane vanilla. And so he ends up being outcast just due to no fault of his own of who he is. But the original early access Wyll was a little bit more, there was more going on. He was more like the Astarian type, not not swarmy or nothing, but he was more or less hiding things, and he was portraying a character, but he wasn't necessarily leaning into it like he does in this one. So it was more of he is a man of situation. It's just the situation, so he has to go forward with it. And I don't really know if we don't know the details. Like maybe the writing for Act 2 and 3 weren't going the way that the original writers wanted, so they wanted the original voice actor to come back in for more lines. Maybe he wasn't available. Maybe that's why they got a different voice actor. We don't know. But they did get an entirely different voice actor and an entirely different personality for Wyll. And so I think that they kind of botched that because they ended up, again, making him a little bit too vanilla for the situation. I love Mazora. I love the whole interaction with some individuals that he has to be forced to be around. I love all that. I love that backstory. I just don't think it belongs to Wyll.
I find it funny that you describe Wyll as this kind of vanilla plain Jane character when you forgot about Gale entirely. Because we just jumped right past him.
Well, I'll come back to Gale because I want to talk a lot about Gale. Yeah.
But no, I do agree with you. I think when you meet Wyll and you start to get the story as it is in the final release of the game, Wyll is very much a cliche. He feels uninteresting because I've heard his story before. It almost feels like if this were a game released 25 years earlier, Wyll would be the main character just so you could project as much of yourself onto them as possible. And Wyll is kind of almost that blank slate because of how plain they are. But his story with Mazora is that's the interesting stuff about him. That's where Wyll's character shines, and he is he's fun to play. He's just not that engaging as a person. I think he's great in combat. I love the Warlock's class. I love all of the subclasses. I mean, outside of the Hexblade that they just recently introduced, I don't think they're tremendously different. But I do enjoy them. But it just, as a companion character, I wanted more from Wyll. I just feel like he's, compared to the people around him, he's boring. He's a bit plain. And he is that kind of cliched righteous hero. Where he's like, I have to save everybody. I have to do the right thing. And you're like, yeah, but that's boring. I've seen that before.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Banana's job.
Also, that's the character I play. So.
I was about to say.
Yeah. I don't need another one of those.
You don't need two of me.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't get all the credit, Yeah.
I'm the hero, Wyll. Get out of here.
Yeah. The ultimate paragon. Well, bring up a little bit of a spoiler, I guess, but Wyll just like all the other the main characters, I should say, Astarion, Gale. Well, not really Gale. They're all Baldurians, except for Lae'zel and I guess Gale. And so when they talk about their home, they're talking about Baldur's Gate. And Wyll is very much at home at Baldur's Gate. He's comes from a high family and stuff. What I don't understand is that the story that they gave him, the reason why he's a warlock, and if you know anything about Dungeons and Dragons, you know you're going to be beholden to some kind of, a devil.
Patron.
Yeah, you're going to have a patron. But it's not that dissimilar in my eyes to a cleric. You also have a patron there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so you're going to make a pact with, a devil. And the story for Wyll is he's trying to help his city. He's trying to save his city. So he makes that pact. And that's how he becomes who he is. That's great. But it's almost like he just went out there 1v1 against this situation. It's like it doesn't really, something's not adding up. But because of who he is and his birth and everything else, it's like you would think there would be he'd go out there with a little bit more enforcement. So it just doesn't make sense. But again, someone like Karlach, which we haven't brought up Karlach yet, who was on her own, who was a street urchin. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think we've talked about this, and a big part of the reason that we've suggested almost the origin for Karlach and Wyll to swap places is because I don't see Wyll as a warlock. I think with his lore background, it doesn't make sense for him to make that contract. It makes much more sense to me for Wyll to be a paladin or a fighter. But I mean, a paladin especially, even with this latest patch introducing the Oath of the Crown, like that sounds about right. But before that, the Oath of the Devout, the idea that like sticking up for the little guy and always protecting those who are vulnerable, that suits Wyll so wonderfully that for him to be a warlock and a melee warlock before Hexblade was a thing, like, you don't make sense, Wyll.
Yeah. If I could, like I said, you don't even have to have the same exact story because his story was going in a very unique way before they rewrote him. So if he was even a barbarian, like I said, to completely switch it with Karlach, then that almost makes sense to me.
A barbarian would work. I can definitely see, especially in that moment where he talks about, the how he got the seeing stone for his eye, which very minor spoiler, but or how he lost his eye, I guess. You can definitely see in that moment a barbarian origin developing, to say that like he felt helpless. He didn't know how to handle that feeling. He gave into his rage, and now he understands how to use his rage to fight. That would have made so much more sense. But no, he's a melee warlock. He made a pact with the devil to be inefficient.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. And then again, we'll talk about Karlach in a minute. But if she was the one who loves her city so much and just takes it upon herself to do this, and she has to make a pact, she's stuck with that pact. And now all those things that she's been doing in Avernus makes sense. Yeah,
exactly. With that whole Karlach being a street urchin, it makes so much sense for her to embrace something like that pact, to say like she had nothing. She had no leverage in Baldur's Gate, and she wanted power, and she wanted to help the city. Yeah. So she was willing to accept the terms of this pact just for the ability to contribute. It would have made so much more sense for her to end up as a warlock,
and she would be even more beloved, I think, in that situation.
Yeah. I think that with the whole story that she has, it suits her so much more.
Yeah.
And it, like, at no point do I see any real issue with her explanation for how her story came to be being this warlock pack. I don't see anything that really needs to be rewritten a ton.
And I know I haven't talked a lot of details about Wyll, but it's hard for me to talk about Wyll without giving major spoilers, because we are talking about Baldur's Gate. We are talking about how the lore of Baldur's Gate and how the government is designed. It's not like other cities. Even Karlach it's mage controlled, but with a license, as we've said before, as long as you can pay for the license. And so it's mage controlled, as my point. So all these different cities have different ways. And so I can't really specifically talk about Baldur's Gate and Wyll without giving a lot of that background lore. But I do think that because of his station, because of his position, and if a force was within Baldur's Gate that moved him out, and he was forced to take on the barbarian role, or wherever because he couldn't contribute anymore, so he was ousted. So he got with the barbarian groups, and they trained him, and they accepted him in, and so now he knows how to fight like that. And his father disowns him because didn't take up the mantle that he wanted him to, or something like that, but he was actually forced out. So much makes more sense now with Wyll.
So you do learn that Wyll was forced out of the city. He was essentially exiled from Baldur's Gate, and that fits so much better with an origin where he gives into a feeling of rage. That just like, I did everything for my city, for my people, and it wasn't enough, and they got rid of me. That suits a barbarian origin so well.
Okay, I'm just going to say it. He was a noble. So if he's a noble, part of the Duke class, and he is not training himself to be more patient, and he does things that are out of turn, and it causes civil unrest, therefore they have to push him out. Whereas other main enemies that we run into in Act 3 can move in. That's how Wyll gets ousted. That's a good story. But it's not the story we got. Again, we should be talking about Wyll, the actual Wyll. Not what we would want.
I think that's a pretty clear indication of where we're at with Wyll, as far as like how we appreciate the character. Is we have our own headcanon that we feel would have been way more satisfying for Wyll. I don't have one of those for Astarion. I don't have one of those for Shadowheart. I mean, not until Act 3. I don't have one of those for Lae'zel. It's just Wyll. And even with Karlach, like, I love the character of Karlach the way she is, and had they swapped these origins, I don't think it would have changed her character that much, but it would have made a huge difference for Wyll.
Yeah, because that's why, Karlach came later in the beta, and she didn't look like she looks now at all. She looked like a just very generic tiefling. She's in one of the models that you can pick out. And I just thought, I was like, they're just kind of making this up as they go. Because we'll talk about Karlach now. When I first met her, I was like, okay, this is neat, because I had always talked to those paladins, and that's how you'll know about her if you know about either Wyll and or the paladins that you run into that are right there. And I knew about that scene, but Karlach was not there. I could always fight them if I wanted to, but Karlach was nowhere around. They would talk about things with this person. I have no idea who they were, and Wyll never brought it up. At that time, in early access, Wyll had not brought up the issue of Karlach. Like I said, it was a complete rewrite. So when Karlach showed up, I was like, we just making stuff up now. It just didn't feel like it was, like, if you play it from 1.0 on, it would seem seamless. But she was not mentioned by Wyll. She was kind of mentioned by the paladins, but I have no idea who this person is. I have no reason to really question the paladins because there's nobody meeting this description around. But I always wondered, is like, so what if we fight them? But you wouldn't find anything on them. You found there's a little note inside the toll house that talks about their pact. And I was like, why would a paladin have to have a pact? There was some clue.
If you so I don't know if this was in, I'm sure this wasn't in the beta in early access, but if you talk to you can use the Speak with Dead spell on the corpse inside the toll house, and he reveals they made a pact with Zariel, and that's why they're pursuing Karlach. Um, and now that we're discussing this, I am seeing the issue with Karlach being a warlock, in that if she were a warlock who made a pact with Zariel, Zariel wouldn't have to send people after her. She'd just know where she is. She could use the terms of her pact to control her. So there would be a little bit of a rewrite there to
for sure.
kind of figure out like how Karlach has gone rogue. But
it's the same way that Wyll did.
Write that.
It's the same way Wyll did.
Well, I think with Wyll, it's this kind of misinformation. With Karlach, I feel like it's tougher to use that. I think when you meet Karlach, she's already realized that her relationship with Zariel is crap. But I honestly, with like, it's one of those things where like they've given themselves enough leeway with the way that the pact is introduced and the terms. They haven't really specified exactly, so they could easily have written this to say that like Zariel wrote a crappy contract and Karlach found a loophole that lets her basically do what she wants. But
I think if we look at what happened in Avernus and the city of El Turel, that she had a contract to take out the tieflings. And that's why she's there.
Yeah.
Because the tieflings have went to the Druid group.
I think that is a very effective way of establishing why Karlach is rebelling.
Yeah.
But I think I need an explanation as to how she's managing to rebel without just being, yanked back on the leash that Zariel has her on.
Again, we're not trying to rewrite the story here, but again, apparently we are. So
we're kind of trying.
I do see the ability of Karlach looking at that and saying, I have a job to do. I have to take out these tieflings. As far as I understand that's my contract. That's what I was told to do. For one reason or another, that's what I have. So she has to go kill name Zevlor.
Mm-hmm.
But she's supposed to take out Zevlor, who is an amazing combatant, by the way. He's a paladin, I believe. Man, he hits hard. Yeah,
he's one of those characters that I think probably is a little underappreciated because you don't get to see him in that role much. But when he joins you and supports your team, he is a capable fighter.
Yeah, so that could say that. I mean, basically, Karlach could be on a missive to take out Zevlor for one, and now she's getting to make her own decisions. Because now she's protected because she still has a worm. So now she's technically under the absolute. So
there you go. That's enough to just say like, oh yeah, the parasite is interfering with the terms of her contract. That the way magic works in the world of Faerun. That's ambiguous enough that I could believe it.
Yeah.
So
there was in the old Dungeons and Dragons. Well, I don't even know if it's in 5, to be honest. It could be, but it's a alignment. Determine alignment, in which you could always do that in the original Baldur's Gate, because there's a quest or two where there's you have doppelgangers. But you also have a guy who looks exactly like another one. And then there's like 3 of them in the room. And I think this is that werewolf island. And you have to do the spell to say, determine alignment, good or bad. And the red one that's bad tells you that that's the fraud. Because you could kill the wrong person and help I think it's a child that you're trying to help, or a couple kids. And you don't know which one it is. And so if you do the alignment. And I was looking for something like that. Then the reason why I bring that up, when I was talking to the paladins, I was like, there's got to be something here that tells me who to do. I pick Karlach? Do I pick them? Because they're paladins, they should be blue.
Right.
And I didn't see anything, so it always confused me. I was like, I don't know.
Well, in old D&D rules, in 2.5 or whatever, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 are based on, they should be lawful good. It's the only option.
Yeah, right.
But not anymore. You could be an evil paladin.
Yeah.
But as you're going through that, you learn who they really are. Having a detect evil or detect alignment spell would be really useful to determine that conversation. Because like there's an insight check you can go through, and if you fail that, then you don't know. And that speak with the dead spell you can use. Outside of those options, like, you are just taking Karlach's word for it.
Yeah. So if Karlach was a warlock, hexblade, let's just say that. She's a warlock hexblade with soul coins. Makes so much sense.
Yep. Definitely.
I'd be slotting those in more often because that's her
Yeah.
it's her situation, you know?
Yeah.
But I don't like giving her the soul coins. I just don't. So
I think she gives a very reasonable explanation in terms of like why she's okay with using them as the barbarian. She's just like, they're already soul coins. They're nothing is going to happen differently if I reject them. So
yeah, so we need the expansion or something that actually takes us to Avernus and sees the. Oh, I almost went into spoiler territory, so cut myself off. Okay, but now let's go to Karlach. We talked about Karlach already, but not officially. So
right.
Yeah, so we run into Karlach, and I know Banana loves Karlach like to death. And I totally appreciate that. I understand why. I like her a lot. She's if we were doing a ranking, I'm sure you'd have her S, but I'd definitely have her as an A. I don't think she's below an A, but she and her story is the main thing. It's not her abilities. It's not anything else. Her story is unique, and it's the simple story of someone, rising above their station and, dealing with a situation. But this is the stories that I love. You do everything right, and there's still tragedy at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not going to go into spoilers, of course, but the story of Karlach is just tragic. It is that classic Greek drama tragedy. That's beautiful. You don't see that in gaming stories very often now.
Yeah, I don't think you see that tragic story all the way through anymore. I think developers don't think their audience wants a story that starts off tragic and ends tragic, and that's Karlach. That's 100% her story. There is no real, maybe depending on how you view it when you get to the endings, there's no real happy ending. There's no real we fixed everything ending for Karlach. And it's been pointed out to me in our discussions about companions in video games that apparently I just love tragic, broken characters. And that's probably why I love Karlach, probably why I love Jack. They're just really interesting, they're really engaging, and I think a big part of Karlach's story for me that I appreciate is her finding a way to latch onto those moments of happiness in what is ultimately a purely tragic story. She just gets, flashes of comfort, and that's all she ever gets, and she finds a way for that to be enough. And that's one of the reasons I think I really, really enjoy that character.
Yeah. And I think also, like we mentioned before, if she had been a warlock, then she'd have that transition that would have to be self-revealing in many ways. And if, let's say, she's a warlock and she can't go back to Avernus now because she has no patron, she has no power, then there would only be one outcome. So, like I said, I really think that Karlach is
I don't like that outcome.
Yeah, but I do think Karlach is the best story of all the companions, I think, because they took a risk, and I like that.
As much as I would love a happy ending for Karlach, I think her story is excellent the way it is. I think it's a uniquely engaging story within video gaming at the moment. I don't think you see anything like that, where you have a character who is not evil aligned and then doesn't get a happy ending.
Yeah, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 kind of fit the same weird arc as KOTOR 1 and 2, because they don't really have a happy ending at the end of them all. It's an ending.
I need to play KOTOR.
I know it's okay, but KOTOR 1, whether you're Sith or evil or good and Jedi or whatever, it has one ending in KOTOR 1. KOTOR 2 takes a lot of those things and says, but what if, not everything ends the way we want it to. And there's always, it's not that there's multiple endings. It just ends on a very, very gray slate. And that's just how sometimes endings end. But there is a lot of resolution. It's not that. It's just the feeling of the bigger picture is not corrected.
Yeah. I think that's particularly within games like that, established in a larger series, in a larger universe where other stories are going on. You have to recognize that the ending of your game can't be too harsh an ending, because the universe around your game is still continuing.
Yeah.
You can't really get that complete resolution that you could in like a standalone game, because people are going to come back to this IP, they're going to write other stories, and there's going to be new conflict, there's going to be new problems. And if you want your game to be a part of that, you're going to need to give people the opportunity to tie it to the new problems they're introducing in their game.
Yep.
So with KOTOR, I don't think you're going to be able to see that real happy ending where we saved everybody and the world's a better place now.
Right.
No,
right.
It's very much the same place. We just fixed a handful of problems.
Right. And that's kind of what I was saying, is that Baldur's Gate 2, at the very end of it, if you finish throwing a ball, there's an ending. I don't know how satisfied you would be with it. And that's kind of where I see Karlach. And that's what I'm saying. So it's Larian did a good job of understanding the spirit of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. And I think in Karlach, that's where you can see that spirit.
I'm sure there are people out there who aren't a fan. I know there are people who are not a fan of the Barbarian class, not a fan of the way she is in combat. I love the Barbarian. I think we've talked about that throw build, and even with the introduction of the new giant Berserker or giant Barbarian subclass, I stick with the Berserker because it's just, it's perfect for that throw build.
Yeah.
So I appreciate her in combat, in story, and she is usually my romance throughout the game, just because I feel like that's the only way for her to have any kind of happiness in the ending.
Yeah.
And it's so tough to try to do other romances, because I just know that's that ending is coming for Karlach, and I'm just gonna be like, well, that sucks.
Yeah.
Let me go hang out with my partner now. See you later.
Yeah. I'll leave it there for Karlach. I think we could go on for like 2 hours about Karlach alone. It's just, we need to do...
I definitely could.
Yeah. Well, we definitely need to spend, organize some time to where we can like deep dive into each character, because I think we could.
Yeah. I do think we almost need a spoiler heavy discussion, as opposed to this one where we're trying to avoid spoilers.
So the next companion we'll go over, very interesting, kind of succinct at times. The Goblin Saza. Goblin Saza is
the intellect of that order.
Yeah. No, I always liked Saza. That was the thing. It's like from the very beginning, I always liked Saza. And I have an achievement for it. And I'm not an achievement hunter, but I have this achievement that I think only like 4% have done, where you're able to kind of save Saza in multiple acts.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, how can you like hate on Saza? But I totally get it. You have to do it a certain way for her to even show up in those acts. So that's why.
It is. It was one of those ones where I knew I was going for that achievement, which helped. and then it was it was a playthrough where I was like, these are not the decisions I would ever make in just like
Mhm.
how I would play in this moment. This is not an immersive playthrough. This is I'm gonna play as a character nothing like me
Yeah.
playthrough.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're gonna go over. I think me personally, my favorite companion is Gale. I love Gale. I've always loved Gale. From the moment I first meet him to the very end, I've never found a situation where I don't like this guy. I love having Gale around. If I'm in the world of Faerun and Gale's around, I'm in a good mood. He is so smart, and he analyzes the situation the way it is. He's very pragmatic too. So you would think his wisdom would be super high. It's not. It's mainly all intellect. But a lot of times people that are at that high intellect aren't always the most pragmatic.
Yeah,
you know,
that's true.
But he is a very caring person. He's a very sensitive person, but he also buries that down when he needs to. He's so intricate, and you can hurt his feelings and he just kind of moves on. He's still, whatever. But if you're nice to him, he wants to show you more. He's not trying to get in your pants all the time. He's got his amazing lore story. If any of the companions in the entire thing that has an amazing lore story, it's Gale. Gale's patron. I don't even know if I can call her a patron. But of course, like all mages, it's Mystra.
Right.
If he's a mage, it's going to be Mystra. But that's why Gale makes sense in a lot of ways, because he's such a pragmatic person. He can be light or dark. There's so much consistency here. Like, they knew what they were doing. Whoever the writers were for Gale knows their lore. Let me just put it that way. So if you want to learn about Baldur's Gate or the lore of Faerun and Dungeons and Dragons, you can't go wrong by having Gale in your party, because it is just, to me, it's a lore dump. And I was just like, the entire time I'm playing with Gale, I'm like, more.
Gale is almost always in my party. I think it's funny because as a wizard, I don't see many multi-class options for him, and I feel like inconsistency with his character. There's no reason to multi-class. Gale is a wizard. Gale is fundamentally, that is who he is. So keeping him a wizard for 12 levels makes the most sense to me. I don't I don't like Gale as much as you do. I like him as a character, and I think a lot of the reasons I don't like him as much as you do are because I see similar traits between him and myself, and that makes me dislike him. But there's a lot going on with that character. There's a lot to like about that character, and there's a wonderful story arc there that really shines, and I enjoy. Like I said, Gale's almost always in my party, so I pretty much have replayed his story dozens of times at this point, and it's not something I ever really get tired of. It's not something like, oh, I have to go do this again for Gale. It's, yeah, let's go do this again. I think his story is super engaging. It does give you that much smaller scale, but that kind of morally ambiguous decision that we saw with the Genophage in Mass Effect 3. It feels like there is a right answer and a wrong answer, but there's not a huge gap between the two. You can definitely make solid arguments on either side. So Gale gives you that kind of that flexibility, and it suits his character a lot, because you'll get Gale's approval in strange moments. He doesn't feel like he is morally very rigid. He's flexible, and he can see the value in a lot of decisions that you make that are more pragmatic than, say, righteous or selfish. He doesn't see them on that scale. He sees them on almost like a utility scale. And for that reason, he can fit in a lot of parties where, like, you know, Wyll is going to expect you to be a hero. Gale is going to expect you to be a pragmatist. So Gale is, for that reason, always around. And being a character that's always around in my playthroughs when I have 1,300 hours in the game and not getting stale is a testament to how well written Gale is. Because I can't imagine too many characters that I'll keep around for 1,300 hours and not get tired of, but Gale's one of them.
Yeah, Gale's one of the, because I don't really do any romance in Baldur's Gate 3. It's just not, but I've seen them, I've done them, but I can't say that I have one that I say, yeah, this is. Now, we haven't gotten to Minthara yet, but but Gale's romance arc is so good. So good. To me, it's the best one.
It feels the most realistic, because I feel like Gale approaches it as an actual romance, and everybody else approaches it as we're probably gonna die. let's have some fun before we die. Gale seems to be that eternal optimist, and I think when he discusses what's going on with him, he has those moments of like, maybe we'll discover a miracle cure around the corner. Maybe we won't. But we have to keep pushing forward, and I think that makes that approach to romance that Gale has make way more sense.
Yeah, I think one of the the first dialogue you run into with him is Gale in a nutshell. You know, he says, depending on your class, whether you're ranger or cleric, or he's like, you wouldn't happen to know of any high-powered clerics or anybody that could maybe get rid of this for us? And then you could respond however you do. But he says, but I may be in the company of the one who might. He's always got that little bit. Doesn't matter how dire the situation is. He's always got that. You never know. There could be this. He's not an optimist, but he's not a fatalist either. You know? Yeah.
He has a lot of those characteristics that we appreciate with Morden, where he sees a lot of what is really going on in the scene, and then is willing to ask for those little bits of information he might not have picked up on. To say like, all right, these are people who I saw on the Nautiloid. They haven't transformed yet. Maybe they cured their infection. Or maybe they're just weirdly delayed like I am, in which case maybe I should join up with them, because they are going to have the same goals I have.
Yeah, that's an excellent example of Morden, because Gale is never, he never loses that childlike fascination with magic. He's like, look, and it's just a little thing he does. Like there's a scene in the camp scene where he's like trying to help you manifest the magic of, even
if you already know how to do magic.
But it's of Mystra. He says, you feel that, you see that, you sense that. That's Mystra. This is why I love magic. And he never loses that, and I can totally respect that. Love that about him. But I think like I said, his romance arc is definitely one of the ones that I highly encourage. Check that one out. It's so good. And his story arc too, between everything else, and I'm just biting my tongue about spoilers on this, but I mean, it's just, there's so much there that it's just so good. His story is just so good.
His story, I think, because it's not so tightly connected to what's really like the main story of Baldur's Gate 3, had to anchor itself somewhere else. And it anchors itself in the lore, and it does such a great job of it.
Which explains why, just from the beginning, I was like, oh, there it is. Because I love it when there's lore that is consistent. It doesn't have to be. Like, there could be a reason why it's breaking off from the lore. But you're going to have to give me a really good reason, because you have all these other previous writers and thinkers and gameplay things, not just within the Baldur's Gate, but, in Dungeons and Dragons. There's a reason why certain things happen. So to just break those rules just because for the inconvenience of, it doesn't fit my story, I don't know. We're not doing that. But Gale, ooh, if you want to learn Dungeons and Dragons and how a lot of things work and how whatever, just look at how Gale reacts to the world all the time. There's a consistency there, and I really appreciate that.